Lena Oduro returned to her late mother's home after her father's health began to decline, thinking she'd be stepping back into a place filled with old warmth. But everything had changed. The walls felt colder and the air heavier. Her stepmother, Mara Fiacco, greeted her with a smile, but it was the kind that made your skin crawl. Too perfect, too forced. It didn't take long for Lena to see what was behind it. Mara didn't speak her hatred out loud. She wrapped it in polite words and quiet glares. She treated Lena like a guest who had overstayed her welcome, even though it was the home Lena had grown up in. Every time Lena entered a room, Mara's eyes followed. Every move was observed. Nothing Lena did ever seemed right, and Mara made sure she felt it. Her smile never left her face, but her eyes said everything. It wasn't just dislike, it was a deep, hidden bitterness, and Lena was about to feel the full weight of it. Mara treated Lena like a burden, constantly monitoring her every move, especially at mealtimes, where every spoonful was questioned and counted. It wasn't just about food, it was about control. Mara never let Lena forget that she wasn't truly part of the family anymore. When Lena served herself even a small portion, Mara would stare at her plate and mutter under her breath, "So much food for someone who doesn't earn it." She never shouted, never made a scene in front of others, but her words cut like blades. She'd sigh loudly when Lena took a second helping, roll her eyes when she poured water, and raise her brow every time Lena reached for bread. The message was always the same: you don't belong here. At every meal, Lena felt like she was being judged. If she served too little, Mara would say she was acting like a martyr. If she served too much, she'd call her greedy. Mara made sure that eating, something so simple, became a moment of shame. Once, Lena barely touched her food, hoping to avoid attention, and Mara asked loudly, "What's wrong with it? Or are you trying to make me look like a bad cook now?" Lena sat in silence, swallowing her pride with her food. The kitchen was the worst. Mara would guard it like a lion. If Lena stepped in to help, she'd be told to stay out of the way. If she stayed away, Mara would complain that she was lazy. There was no winning. Even leftovers were kept under lock and key. Mara once told a neighbor, loud enough for Lena to hear, "Some girls think they can just come back and eat like queens. Not in my house." Lena heard it all, but said nothing. Despite the quiet torture, Lena kept doing her part. She cleaned, cooked when allowed, and cared for her sick father. She tried to ignore the cold looks, the snide comments, the calculated silence. But the emotional weight was growing heavier every day. Her stomach often remained half full, but the ache inside her was never just from hunger. It was from the humiliation that came with every bite. Mara would sometimes sit across from her at dinner and smile sweetly while watching her eat, like she was enjoying her discomfort. Even the way she passed the salt felt like a warning, like she was keeping score. One evening, after coming home late from helping a neighbor, Lena found the pot of stew already placed on the stove. The house was quiet. Her father was asleep, and Mara was on the veranda talking to a visitor. Lena walked into the kitchen, tired and hungry, and gently lifted the pot lid just to check what was inside. Not even to eat, just to see. She was about to cover it again, when Mara's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "You really couldn't wait, could you?" Mara stood at the kitchen door, eyes blazing. "Touching food that isn't yours. Do you have no shame?" Lena froze. She didn't understand. She hadn't taken anything. But Mara didn't care. She walked outside and called for the neighbors, shouting that Lena had disrespected her, had stolen food from the family pot. People gathered quickly. Some looked confused, others just curious. Mara spoke loudly, with fake tears and trembling lips, saying, "She just put her hands on the food like she owns this house. How much more should I take?" Lena stood quietly, holding back tears as the crowd whispered. Her face burned with humiliation. She wanted to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. And even if they did, would anyone believe her? It was just a touch, just 1 second, but Mara had waited for it. She turned it into a scene. And now, Lena's shame was being served to the whole village. "You ate too much yesterday," Mara would whisper, eyeing Lena's plate with sharp, cold eyes. "That's not a widow's daughter's portion." Her words were always quiet but heavy, landing straight in Lena's heart like a stone. She never shouted or raised her voice in front of others. She didn't need to. Her whispers were powerful enough to make Lena lose her appetite. Every time they sat down to eat, Mara's eyes would move from the food to Lena, calculating every bite, as if she were measuring the weight of what Lena had taken from her kitchen. Lena started serving herself smaller and smaller portions, hoping to avoid those cold stares and cutting remarks. But it never worked. If she ate less, Mara would say, "What? You think you're too good for our food now?" If she served just a little more, she'd get the same line again. "That's too much for someone like you." No matter what Lena did, she was wrong. Every meal felt like a test, not of hunger, but of patience, of endurance. She often sat at the edge of the table, quietly chewing while Mara spoke loudly to others, pretending Lena wasn't even there. Sometimes, Mara would wait until everyone else had finished eating. Then she'd turn to Lena and say, "You can take what's left if you really need it." The food would be cold, sometimes just crumbs, but Lena would still say thank you. Not because she was grateful, but because she was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of the daily games, tired of the quiet war she was stuck in. One afternoon, Mara invited a few neighbors over for lunch. She cooked a big meal and made sure everyone noticed how hard she had worked. Lena helped with the cleaning, arranging chairs, and serving water. She didn't sit to eat until everyone else had their plates. When she finally did, Mara leaned toward her and said, "Be careful not to embarrass me. You already ate too much yesterday." It was just loud enough for the woman sitting next to Lena to hear. The woman looked away, uncomfortable, pretending she didn't catch it. But Lena felt it, the shame, the tightness in her chest. It wasn't about food anymore. It was about being reminded again and again that she didn't belong. Mara made sure that every bite Lena took felt like she was stealing something. Lena began skipping meals, pretending she wasn't hungry. She would wait until late at night, after everyone had gone to bed, and quietly drink water to fill her stomach. Even then, she worried Mara would notice the missing water and accuse her of being wasteful. Every mealtime became a moment of fear, of waiting for the next insult. Lena had never imagined that food, something meant to bring people together, could be used to break her down, piece by piece. But in Mara's house, even a plate of rice was a weapon. And Lena, day by day, was losing the strength to keep pretending it didn't hurt. One afternoon, Lena came home from a long and tiring shift at the village clinic. The sun had already begun to set, and the dust from the road clung to her clothes. Her feet ached, and her stomach was completely empty. She hadn't eaten all day. At the clinic, she had skipped lunch so an elderly woman could have her portion. That was just how Lena was. Always giving, always quiet, always putting others before herself. Now, as she stepped into the quiet house, all she hoped for was just a little food, something warm, something small to settle her hunger. The house was silent. Her father was likely resting in his room, and Mara was nowhere to be seen. Lena placed her bag down slowly and walked toward the kitchen, her steps light, careful not to disturb anyone. The smell of stew still lingered in the air, that rich, familiar scent of ground nuts, onions, and slow-cooked meat. It made her stomach twist even more. She reached the stove and saw the big black pot sitting there, the lid slightly tilted from earlier use. She didn't want to eat right away. She only wanted to check if any food was left, maybe just a spoon or two, enough to calm the hunger. So gently, almost like a whisper, she touched the lid and lifted it just enough to peek inside. The steam rose up softly, and inside she saw the stew, still warm. Not much, but enough for a small bowl. She hadn't even picked up a spoon when she heard footsteps behind her, heavy, fast, sharp, her body tensed. And before she could even turn, Mara's voice filled the room like thunder. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped. Lena froze. I was checking if there's any left," Lena replied, her voice low, her eyes still on the pot. "Checking? Or stealing?" Mara's voice was louder now, full of false outrage. "Did I say you could touch it? Do you think this house is yours now? Is the clinic feeding you so little that you must sneak into my kitchen like a rat?" Lena stepped back slowly, still not saying anything. Her hands trembled slightly. She hadn't taken a single bite. She had only lifted the lid, but Mara wasn't interested in the truth. She was already walking outside, calling loudly for the neighbors. "Come and see for yourselves," she shouted. "She thinks she can just help herself to whatever she wants. No shame." Lena stood in the kitchen, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. Outside, voices were beginning to gather. Whispers, footsteps, curiosity. She hadn't eaten, hadn't even touched a spoon. But Mara's words had turned a simple action into a crime. The food wasn't just stew anymore. It had become a trap. And Lena, tired, hungry, and humiliated, stood at the center of it, wondering how something so small had become something so cruel. Mara stormed into the kitchen, her face twisted with fake anger, eyes wide, as if she'd caught someone committing a terrible crime. "So now you're stealing food behind my back?" she shouted, her voice sharp and loud. "You think this house belongs to you?" Her words hit Lena like slaps. Lena stood frozen, still holding the lid of the pot in her hand. She hadn't even taken anything. She'd only checked if there was food. But Mara didn't care about the truth. She was already turning the moment into a scene, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. Before Lena could say anything, Mara stepped closer, pointing a finger in her face. "You come in after doing God knows what all day, and now you sneak around in my kitchen like a thief. You didn't even ask." Her voice kept rising, as if she wanted the walls to echo. Lena tried to speak, her mouth opening slightly, but no words came out. What could she even say? She hadn't taken a bite. She hadn't broken anything. She was just hungry, just tired. But Mara had made up her mind. "I cook, I clean, I run this house, and you think you can just walk in and help yourself?" Mara continued. "Your mother's gone. Your father is too weak to see what you're doing. But I see it. You've always thought you were better than everyone else." Lena stood still, her hands by her sides now, the heat from the stew pot still brushing her fingers. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her stomach turned, not from hunger anymore, but from shame. She didn't understand why Mara hated her so much, why every small thing she did became a reason to attack her. All she had wanted was to check if there was any stew left. That's all. But Mara was treating her like a criminal. The sound of footsteps came from outside. Mara had left the door wide open. A few neighbors who were passing by had already paused, peeking in, their eyes filled with curiosity. Mara, noticing them, didn't calm down. Instead, she got louder, her voice shaking with fake emotion. "Imagine the disrespect. I let her stay in this house, and this is how she thanks me. By sneaking around and taking what doesn't belong to her," people whispered. Some looked surprised, others unsure. Lena felt their eyes on her like needles. She wanted the ground to open up and swallow her. She hadn't even eaten. But here she was, being judged, humiliated, and made to look like a thief in her own childhood home. Mara crossed her arms, breathing heavily, her eyes still fixed on Lena. "You're not a child anymore. You should know better. But clearly some people don't understand boundaries." Lena blinked quickly, holding back the tears. She looked around, but no one came forward to defend her. She was alone, again, and in that moment, Lena realized this wasn't about food. It never was. It was about control, about power, and Mara was making sure everyone knew who really ruled this house. Without waiting for an answer, Mara grabbed the stew pot from the stove, her movements loud and dramatic. Lena stood there in shock, unable to move, as Mara stormed outside with the pot in her hands. The metal lid clanged as it slid sideways, and a bit of the stew splashed over the edge. But Mara didn't care. Her only goal was to make sure everyone heard and saw what she was about to do. "Come and see!" she shouted, her voice echoing through the compound. "Come and see what this girl has done!" Some neighbors were already nearby, curious from the earlier shouting. Others began stepping out of their homes, drawn by Mara's loud voice and the strange sight of her holding a food pot outside. "She couldn't even wait," Mara continued, raising her voice like she was on a stage. "She crept into my kitchen, touched the food like a starving animal. No shame, no respect." She looked around, making eye contact with everyone, her face full of fake hurt and outrage. "Who raised a girl like this? Even if you're hungry, don't you ask first? But not her. She just helps herself like she owns the place." Lena stepped outside slowly, her hands shaking. Her cheeks burned with shame as more eyes turned to her. She could feel their judgment, their whispers curling in the air around her like smoke. Some looked at her with pity, others with confusion. No one really knew the full story, but Mara's voice filled the silence, painting her as greedy and ungrateful. "She can't control her hunger," Mara said, placing the pot dramatically on the ground, as if it were evidence in a crime. "Not even a word of permission. Is this what a good girl does? Is this how you behave in someone else's home? Lena stood at the edge of the gathering, her heart pounding. She wanted to scream, to tell everyone that she hadn't eaten anything, that she had only lifted the lid to see if there was food left, but her voice refused to come out. She felt trapped, like her truth was locked behind her ribs. One woman in the crowd finally spoke, her voice soft. But Mara, she didn't even take a spoon. Mara turned quickly, glaring at her. So you're saying I'm lying? You think I'd bring this pot out here for fun? The woman went silent. Lena lowered her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. The stew still smelled good, and yet she felt sick. Mara had turned a simple moment of hunger into public shame, not because she cared about the food, but because she wanted to remind Lena that she held the power. And as the crowd slowly began to break apart, some shaking their heads, some saying nothing, Lena stood alone, not hungry anymore, just hurt. Humiliated, Lena stood silently, her eyes fixed on the ground, as whispers floated through the air like dust. Some people murmured about her being greedy, others nodded at Mara's loud words, and a few simply watched, unsure of what to believe. But no one stepped forward to speak for her. The stew pot still sat on the ground, its lid off, the smell of warm food mixing with the cold sting of public shame. Lena felt exposed, like her heart was laid bare for the village to inspect. Her lips were pressed tightly together, her throat dry, but she didn't defend herself. What could she even say that Mara hadn't already twisted? Just as the crowd started to turn away, a voice cut through the noise, calm, deep, and steady. That's enough. Everyone turned. Standing a few feet away was Uncle Ezekiel, her late mother's brother, a quiet man, always polite, always watching, but rarely speaking unless it mattered. His eyes weren't on Mara, they were on Lena, and in that look there was no judgment, only understanding. I've watched long enough, he said, stepping forward. The neighbors moved aside as he walked slowly toward the middle, where the pot sat like some kind of symbol of crime. Lena didn't take your food, Mara. She hasn't taken anything from you. Not food, not comfort, not respect, but you've taken her peace every single day. Mara blinked, caught off guard. Ezekiel, you weren't even here. I was, he cut in gently. I've seen it. The way you speak to her when no one's around, the way she flinches when you walk into the room, the way she eats like someone being watched. That's not hunger, Mara. That's fear. The crowd went quiet. Eyes shifted uncomfortably. Mara's mouth opened, but no words came out. Ezekiel looked at Lena again. She came home to care for her father. She left her own life behind. And this is how she's thanked? With shame? With cruelty? He bent down and gently placed the pot lid back on. Enough is enough. This isn't about stew. This is about power. And today, you went too far. Lena felt her chest tighten. Her eyes stung, but she didn't cry. She simply breathed. For the first time in a long while, someone had spoken up for her. Someone had seen her. And that changed everything. The neighbors stood in awkward silence. Some looked away, ashamed. A few nodded slowly, realizing the truth in Ezekiel's words. And Mara, speechless and red-faced, finally took a step back, not in defeat, but in exposure. The mask had slipped. Lena still didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her silence, once used against her, now stood stronger than ever because someone had finally broken it for her. Ezekiel stood firm, his voice calm but steady, as he looked around at the gathered neighbors. He wasn't there to cause drama, only to reveal what had been hidden for too long. You all see this moment, he said, motioning toward the stew pot and Mara's dramatic accusations. But you haven't seen the days leading up to it. You haven't seen how this girl is treated behind closed doors. Everyone watched in silence, their attention now focused fully on him. Mara shifted uncomfortably, but didn't interrupt. Ezekiel continued. Mara doesn't just accuse Lena of stealing food. She starves her quietly, he said. She rations her meals like she's punishing her. She counts her bites at the dinner table, like a jailer, not a stepmother. If Lena eats one spoon too much, she's scolded. If she stays quiet, she's accused of plotting something. Nothing she does is right. A few people gasped quietly. Others looked shocked. And at night, Ezekiel added, his voice lower now, more serious. Mara locks the kitchen. She hides the food away, like Lena is some kind of thief, not a young woman who works all day, who helps at the clinic, who gave up her life to care for her sick father. Lena stood nearby, her head lowered but her ears wide open. Her heart thudded in her chest. These were things she had never told anyone, but Ezekiel had seen them. He had noticed, and now he was saying what she had been too afraid to speak. "She treats her worse than a servant," he said, looking Mara straight in the eyes. "At least servants are allowed to eat. Lena, she's punished for being hungry." Mara's face had turned red, her arms crossed tightly, but there were no words coming from her lips now. The neighbors stood in stunned silence. Some looked at Lena with new eyes, eyes filled with sympathy, with guilt, with shame for ever believing Mara's version of the story. Ezekiel's words hung in the air like truth finally set free. Lena didn't smile, didn't cry, but inside her, something heavy began to lift, not just the shame, but the silence that had chained her for so long. A few women from the village stepped forward, their voices soft at first, but steady. One of them, Mama Tiri, who was known for her fruit stall at the market, spoke gently. "I always saw her pass by after work, too tired to even look up, and not once did I see her buy food, even something small. I thought maybe she just didn't like to eat outside, but now I know, she wasn't allowed." There was a quiet ripple through the crowd as others listened. Another woman, younger and holding a baby on her back, cleared her throat and said, "Mara's words sound like the ones I hear in my own home. My husband does the same. If I take an extra slice of bread, he says I'm greedy. If I speak, I'm disrespectful. It's always control, always silence." Their words filled the space like a storm slowly rolling in. The neighbors, who had once looked at Lena with suspicion, now started shifting their eyes toward Mara, their faces changing. One by one, more women spoke. "My sister was treated the same way by her in-laws," another added. "She would wait till everyone ate and only then dare to serve herself, like a stranger, in her own house." Lena stood still, her heart pounding. She had felt so alone all this time, carrying the shame and pain quietly, thinking no one would understand. But here they were, voices rising, matching the ache in her heart with stories of their own. It wasn't just her story anymore, it belonged to many. "Some of us never speak, because we're told we're lucky just to have a roof," said a tall woman in the back. "But what's a roof if it crushes your spirit every day?" Mara tried to interrupt, but her voice was drowned out now. The tide had turned, her power had lived in silence, but silence was gone. The women surrounded Lena, not just with their words, but with something deeper, solidarity. They had been quiet for too long. Her courage gave them theirs, and for the first time in that courtyard, Lena didn't feel small. She didn't feel ashamed. She felt lifted, not just defended, but believed. As the voices of the women rose, something inside her finally settled. This wasn't just a moment of support. It was the beginning of something that couldn't be undone. The elders of the village gathered later that evening under the large baobab tree, where matters of importance were always discussed. Word had already spread of what had happened, the public shaming, the cruel truth revealed, and the brave voices that followed. The air was heavy with silence, as the oldest among them, Nana Kojo, slowly stood and faced Mara, who now avoided every eye around her. "We do not raise our children to be treated like this," he said, his voice calm but sharp. "This village may be small, but our hearts must be big. What you have done to Lena was not discipline. It was cruelty, emotional cruelty that shames us all." Others nodded in agreement. One by one, elders spoke, not with anger, but with disappointment. They condemned Mara's actions, her silence breaking only to wound, her hunger for control disguised as care. "This girl," one elder said, pointing gently toward Lena, "did nothing but return to her father's house in his time of need, and for that, she was punished." Mara said nothing. Her shoulders had fallen. Her face no longer wore its proud mask. Lena stood quietly through it all, not to seek revenge, but to finally feel heard, and this time, she truly was. Not long after, Lena packed her few belongings and moved into her late mother's old tailoring room, small, dusty, but filled with memories of warmth and kindness. She cleaned it slowly, one corner at a time, as if rebuilding her spirit with each sweep. Where her mother once stitched clothes with love, Lena found a new purpose. She named it Lena's Table. It wasn't just a kitchen, it was a safe place. A space where women who had been silenced, shamed, or hurt could come and cook, eat, and talk without fear. She welcomed them all, young girls, older women, mothers, and daughters. They shared food, stories, laughter, and sometimes tears. Lena became more than just the girl who was once mistreated. She became a voice, a steady, kind voice, for those who were still finding their own. She showed them that their pain didn't have to end in silence, that healing could start with a warm meal and a safe seat at a shared table. And so, from the place where she was once starved of love and respect, Lena built something that fed others, not just with food, but with hope.